to ask questions throughout the presentation. I'd be happy to answer them as we go if they're immediate questions. Otherwise, I'll maybe try to answer them at the end as a group. I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about urban environments, cities, and how the digital lighting revolution is transforming those environments. And hopefully it will be some inspiration for you, some ideas, some open questions in the field that we're all facing. My own background from MIT, where I did a lot of research on smart city related topics, will be part of this conversation, and I hope it's interesting for you and look forward to the conversation. So I'm going to disconnect the video for bandwidth reasons and switch over to the presentation. Enjoy. So hopefully you'll all now be able to see the first slide. Enhancing cities with connected lighting systems. If you can't see the video for whatever reason, please, as Suma said, place a question in the chat feature. So what I'd like to talk about today is really related to kind of the excitement and the energy that we all associate with cities. This is a line from Alicia Keys' song that the Empire State Building was open to. Street lights, big dreams, all looking pretty. I love this line because it really, to me, summarizes the excitement and the excitement of urban environments and the energy that we associate with nighttime in the city. And in many ways, the digital lighting revolution is enabling us to capture that excitement and that energy and create something unique and new. And what's happening really when you look at cities, here's a view of Los Angeles in California, seen from Mount Wilson, and you can see that the nighttime environment of cities is just a myriad of light points. There are so many now light points in urban environments, whether they're private or public, that together we really have a unique environment that's quite different from daytime and quite different from the daytime experience of a city. And so what we really are all engaged in together as a group and as an ecosystem of creative lighting practitioners and technologists is shaping that nighttime environment. It's taking all of those light points together and turning them into something that is both iconic on a really big scale, but also really meaningful and important for people on an intimate and small scale. And the thing that is important for us getting the slides back. So I was just talking about energy savings and how important energy savings are for urban communities, and that this is definitely one of the first things that they have in mind. But I think the important thing and the interesting thing that's taking place is that they're going much beyond that. And, this is still from the previous mayor of New York City, but he had a very broad plan for how to achieve the goals for 2030 at the time around energy. And it was really much more comprehensive, as you can see, than just looking at energy savings pure and simple. There's really a desire to go much beyond energy savings and really try to capture the potential of the green economy, trying to incorporate quality of life issues, really trying to think holistically about all the different things that make a city into something that is livable and worth moving to. And so a lot of folks talk about this idea of a dual challenge. So on the one hand, yes, it's about energy and efficiency and saving dollars and cents. And on the other hand, it's really about creating quality of life, attracting people to your environment, really whether it's businesses or residents. And so trying to really take this dual approach throughout is something that lighting is really set up to do. And so when we think about leveraging, the power of digital lighting, it's really about tackling this dual challenge as you go. And one of the exciting things and one of the huge opportunities around digital lighting is the fact that you can very easily tackle both these issues at once. There's almost no project where you can't talk about quality of life issues and a certain amount of savings together, depending on how you look at it. And so thinking about how to bring your city to life, on the one hand, it may very well be about maintenance and energy consumption and really thinking about the whole street lighting network. But on the other hand, it may also be about creating these iconic moments, focusing on particular areas in the city, and really trying to bring those to life in a new way. And so as we go through the rest of this conversation, I really want all of you to think about your city at night and think about different parts of the city at night. Very rarely do we, sometimes when we're on our way home in the evening hours, we may or may not be conscious of where we're walking or the different lighting conditions. But I think, the next time you do wander around, take a moment to figure out why you take the route you take, why you walk down certain streets at night and not others, and why you seek out certain neighborhoods and not others in the evening, and look at how the lighting conditions potentially are somehow steering your attention. And so the first half of this presentation, I want to think about some of the things that are really in transition in urban lighting and in lighting for cities. And then in the second half, I really want to think about how some of these digital control systems are having an impact on what it might mean to start to rethink different kinds of urban lighting installations. And so the first one is really this general observation. The Great White Way was the term that was used for Broadway and many other main streets across the U.S. At the turn of the century, beginning of the 20th century, and it was really about this main shopping street, this commercial avenue, this center city. And you can see here in this old hypothetical city, this drawing from the 30s, where they show an image of the hypothetical imaginary city, where you can see how the street lighting defines the structure of the city. By looking at where there's light, where there isn't light, you really can read the city from above. And it's a quite hierarchical system, which makes sense to some degree. You have more light in certain commercial areas than in residential areas, so that all makes sense. But I think what we're seeing today is really this very broad and much more multifaceted appearance of light at night. There's a lot more variety. There's a lot more different kinds of installations. Here's an example that I think we'll come back to in a little bit as well, that is in Southwark, just near the Tate Modern and the South Bank in London, and looking at reinventing these Victorian aqueducts, yes, for safety on the one hand, but also for delight. So really taking the opportunity when you do have to make an intervention to also celebrate that intervention and not just focus on the functional aspects, but really trying to use some of the other capabilities that digital lighting present to explore and invent what it means to use light to enhance safety and interest in visual interest. And so we've been looking at, with several colleagues, many different examples around the globe, really, trying to think and focus on specifically urban environments and pedestrian spaces, and thinking about what this really means for the underlying assumptions that many people hold about why and how light should be in cities. And so I'm going to talk through these 5 different assumptions that I think in some ways we can revisit these days, and we're already seeing people, creative practitioners and cities and public entities rethink. And I won't read them out here, but we'll go through them one by one next. So the first one is really around car-centric nightscapes. A lot of, especially outdoor lighting, most of the time, is very much focused around roadways, which with good reason, and that is something that will continue to some extent. But, and you can see here an image of one of my favorite films called Night on Earth by Jim Jarmusch. If you haven't seen it and you're a nighttime aficionado, this is one to add to your list. But what you can see is that there's a real interest in creating pedestrian-oriented spaces. So thinking about how media and light together create different kinds of focused areas that are for people. Here's an example of the Media Lab Prado, a very interesting institution in Madrid, Spain, that focuses on digital education, digital technology. It's an open space that's used in many, many different ways, and they've extended their educational mission out to the facade, which is used in lots of different festivals, programming festival, interactive lighting festivals, different kinds of explorations that test out how these types of infrastructures can really play a role in civic life. So trying to think about them as part of civic life, not just as media that's static and also just focused on one particular communication goal. The second one is about more uniformity. To some extent, that is a good thing, and we want to encourage that as much as possible. But what also has to happen at the same time is this idea of careful curation. And I think of it as curation in a way because it focuses on the trajectory that people experience as they move through the city. So yes, we should try to focus on certain kinds of uniformity and lighting distributions, of course, but at the same time, we have to think about how people will experience their movement through the city, and will there be focal points or moments that that they will remember and that leave a certain lasting memory behind. There's some interesting research going on also in the U.S. That Nancy Clanton and Ron Gibbons have been doing around different preferences also that people are showing for degrees of uniformity, but also color. And so this is really what's kind of pushing us to rethink how we might want to incorporate new technologies and capabilities into these settings. Here's a somewhat facetious, this is the third point. It's really about, light is always from above kind of thinking to something different. This is, a little bit facetious to put these old light towers up, but I think they show kind of the extreme mode, and this was, of course, a 19th century, early 20th century vision where it was really about, logical sort of extension of placing light in the city. Why don't we just group light and kind of light the city from one single point? Of course, this does not work. And what we see, what's very interesting today is that it's really about creating these different kinds of enveloping environments. And I think this is also very much tied up with the new capabilities that LED lighting technology presents. With the freedom that LED and digital lighting brings, you can start to incorporate lighting almost as a building material into all different surfaces and areas of an environment, whether it's indoor or outdoor, and also in those transition spaces between indoor and outdoor. So I really enjoy even Toth-DePena and Focus Lighting's project that they did in Miami, where they rethought a transitional space between a municipal building and a garage as a kind of a totem, as a kind of a shadow box that was that records traces of people who are walking by. So you get this kind of imprint of the activity levels that took place in that particular space over the course of a day. And what I find interesting about that is that it's almost like the light becomes a companion in that setting, and it really changes the feeling of safety and presence that people experience as they move through that space, which otherwise would be extraordinarily bland and potentially frightening for people, especially if there's not many other people around. So trying to think of these different surfaces together and how light can really be incorporated into all of those different surfaces and what that then means for the material experience that people have close up in a way. The next point is really about, is it really just about adding more light? One of the challenges in urban environments in general is that we have a kind of a layering of light, layers on top of one another that sometimes leads to too much light. And then what happens is that potentially different focal elements disappear or aren't as visible anymore. So it's not just about adding more, it's how you add more. And that's where there's a lot of interesting work taking place. Also looking at historic buildings and trying to think about layering of facade lighting and other kinds of architectural lighting in order to create a much more differentiated experience in the city. So it's really, as you all know, about thinking what contrast does and how different techniques around using contrast are very interesting and appropriate for creating something that is memorable, dramatic, and exciting that people will remember, and that frankly also is easier to navigate. It's much easier to understand where you should move, how you should move in a city setting if you have these different layers of light. The fifth one is really around this question of one size fits all, which is important. I mean, we need guidelines, etc., but also at the same time to think about how we celebrate diversity. And these two projects are both very different kinds of examples. This one here is Crown Fountain in Millennium Park by Calme Plensa, Schiller Shook, and Crook Sexton, who were the architects and lighting designers. And they work together with the artist to create what's truly a unique public space. And one of the elements is this fountain in this much larger park setting, which is probably was the most dramatic reinvention of public space in North America in the last decade. It's a dramatically designed and curated space. At the same time, it's a very intimate space, so you have all different kinds of layers of experience here. And what you really capture is this idea that the environment reflects the diversity of the people in the city. And of course, Calme Plensa does this quite literally with the faces. But another thing to keep in mind here, and something that people are focusing on, especially as we start to understand better, for example, what happens with the aging eye, how light level requirements change. There's a lot of focus and interest and need to understand these different needs of different people when it comes to light and environment. And so as a sort of a bonus point, I like to think about what this actually means, or what these changing mindsets might mean for cities as a whole. Another classic screenshot from a film by Jacques Tati, really thinking about the difference between a city that is potentially not as resilient as you might imagine, because it may not be able to adapt as easily, to one that is quite malleable. And I'm citing Richard Sennett here, a really well-known urban sociologist, and when he talks about the brittle city, it's really about the fact that we don't want to create infrastructures that are not able to adjust and adapt over time, because as a result, we might set things in motion that are harder to maintain over time. And one of the exciting and interesting things that's taking place with these new lighting infrastructures is that they are very much malleable and very much part of the reinvention of cities, I think. And that's something that all of us are a part of. And so I find that very exciting and also inspiring. Here's a small example of the London Eye in the UK, in London, and you can see how during the Olympics, a small lighting and technology group, they reinvented it as kind of a giant mood ring for the city of London during the Olympics. They did natural language processing on all of the Twitter feeds that were being posted in relation to in connection with the Olympics. And they started to tease out different moments from that Twitter feed, and that's the graph you can see. And then they kind of converted this graph into an ambient data representation. So they reprogrammed the lighting on the London Eye every evening to reflect what they had discovered in the data. And this is just an example of how, and it's a playful example, but it's an example of how an infrastructure can start to reflect the metabolism of its surroundings in a way that perhaps in the past was not possible at all. And so this comes back to now this dual challenge that I mentioned a while ago, that was really around you know, what do people really want in cities? What do people really want in smart cities? And it brings us back to this dual challenge that, yes, we focus on efficiency, we do everything we can to save cost and energy, but at the same time, we have to really focus and emphasize questions of sociability, of fun, of playfulness, of transparency, that together make cities unique and make cities what they are, and make cities into those places that we all flock to, as we're seeing in this century. And so what is really driving people's desire to reinvent these different kinds of urban environments? And I think here we can revisit some of the things that are really, you know, right at that core that you might imagine. And so as you look around your city and as you're thinking about the different parts of your city and the different projects you encounter, there really are still very, very much, you know, I think classic value drivers for many people that are focused on environmental sustainability, that are focused on socioeconomic vibrancy, and also perceptual and visual quality. And those are three different themes that are very large themes that, you know, really you will find reflected in most of the successful projects, or most projects that people really mention or reference as exemplary. And so I think what's important to keep in mind as we translate these, you know, you could argue traditional value drivers into something that's very much a digital platform that's future-oriented and quite different than the types of lighting platforms that we might have encountered in the past, we have to see how these different value drivers are actually translating into something that people can experience in the city, and how these value drivers are embedded in the technologies that we are implementing in the city. And what I find particularly interesting in this transition to digital lighting has to do with how people feel engaged by the infrastructures and the lighting systems that they encounter. And so that's where I want to go next in the second half, when I focus on how different people engage with light in different ways, and how different types of projects also engage people in different ways. And so in a way, you can think of almost just the physical environment on the one hand, and then how does this environment come to life? So in a way, you know, the first half is really thinking about the hardware, and the second half is thinking about the software. And so that's where I want to go next. And the way I've been thinking about this is related to levels of engagement. And these are levels of engagement that are very much about how people experience an environment. So they're not as much focused on how the underlying technology is set up. They're much more focused on how people experience a particular environment or a particular setting. And So here you can see an example too of a project that's also quite fun, but it gives you a sense of where this might be going. These temporary football fields projected onto a plaza that suddenly transform how that space is perceived and used. And this is just a testament to the power of a visual transformation of a space that light can enable. And so I'm going to talk through these 4 different levels of engagement and give some examples. And I think when you hear them, you'll be reminded of different kinds of elements in your city that also fall into these categories. And when we start with ambient, it's really more about something that is surrounding you, that's there, that's a presence in the space. Narrative is much more related to how storytelling is embedded into digital lighting. And this is very important because I think by definition, light is a time-based medium. The sun defines day and night, and so does digital lighting or other kinds of artificial lighting that by definition has a certain kind of rhythm that it also gives to the city. To a third point, which I think of as responsive, which is an infrastructure that is much more reflective of, say, what's happening in its environment, a little bit like the London Eye that I just mentioned. And then interactive, which is really where people are directly engaging with something and they are programming it, they're changing it, they are having a direct impact on it, and they're quite aware of that. So it's not so much about aggregate data that is driving something like in a responsive setting, but it's much more about a direct link between a person, a user in a space, and what's around them. And so in this first ambient setting, I like to use some work that Janet Eckelman, who's an artist based in Boston, actually has been doing for several years now around using very ephemeral infrastructures as a way to reshape space. And it is an ambient type thing because I feel like it sets a tone for a space. This is a piece from Phoenix, Arizona, which I like to show because it went through a very interesting history in a way. When it was first installed on this central plaza, there was a lot of debate and discussion about why this would really be needed and why do we need to really create this kind of setting, what's the value of that. And then you can see that years later, people really turned this sculpture into how they even think of downtown. It's something that is truly part of people's experience of the downtown, and in a way it sets a tone for what can happen in this plaza, and it's actually even turned into the logo of the downtown district. So in terms of economic revitalization, in terms of marking the value and the importance of a particular zone in the city, it truly transformed what people thought about. And you can see how the nighttime view, even though this is a little washed out, this newspaper article, you can still see that the nighttime view was the one that really stuck in people's minds. And I think it's very important to keep in mind how different kinds of these interventions like this can reshape how people imagine something could be, which then in turn, of course, actually leads them to behave differently. A different example that I also think of as something more ambient, even though it's a little bit, quite different, a project that Electroland did for a community college in New Haven, Connecticut, that is an interesting kind of enveloping also installation that reflects the community of this college and also speaks to the city outside about what's going on in this college and who's in this college and how those community members are actually engaged with their site, with their location, and the diversity of that place. And so I think it's an interesting ambient type installation that grabs people's attention, but then also again dissipates into the background. Another coming to the next level for our colleagues also in France, a very exciting and really amazing project initiated also by Régis Creuset who created the experience of this tower. A very, to me, a really beautiful example of how the reinvention of an existing building that has a lot of history and a lot of also identity baggage, potentially, shall we say, that was reinvented through a narrative. I think that is very, very powerful. And I don't think the videos will play here, but there is some wonderful video material online about the reinvention of the tower. And what's particularly exciting about it is that there was a very explicitly curated story that was part of the reinvention of the tower that relates to the dynamic movement that was generated as a result of these very simple accents on the edge of the building that are related to the architecture of the building, of course, but once set in motion across the seasons, as you can see here, so there's different seasonal lighting colors, but also over the course of an evening and also over the course of a year, that start to tell a story about how this building was reinvented, how it's actually a dynamic part of the skyline, and how it also links with the space below. So this video won't play here, but like I said, I would really encourage you to look at this because it has a very elegant way of transitioning this part of the city from daytime to nighttime, one of the most busy intersections and transit hubs in the city, and how the story kind of the building integrates with that. But it's very much a story that's curated by the designers, by the creative folks behind it. So it's that kind of linear unfolding that's not dissimilar to, say, a play or some other kind of narrative that you might know from other media. But I think this is an interesting element because it links, kind of it's almost the linchpin between the ambient and when you start to get into the responsive. So it's almost a first step towards creating something that is much more dynamic and much more, say, unpredictable. So that's where we're going next. When you think about responsive, this is where I like to think about how infrastructure reflects the metabolism of the city that it's in. And this is a really extraordinary piece by Leo Villarreal called The Bay Lights, which many of you might have seen already. But what it really is doing is it's these simple white light nodes on the cables of the bridge. There are many, many of them. They are programmed not in a way, and you can see Leo here programming, but they're not programmed in such a way that there's a repetitive sequence of images that plays on them. They're not just telling a linear story that was pre-recorded. What they're doing is they're responding in a way to rules that are derived from the environment. So things like traffic flow, things like water flow, things like wind and weather conditions. All of these elements together are what he uses to create rule-based systems, which then lead to different kinds of emergent lighting patterns. So what that means is that the lighting patterns that are displayed are not pre-thought out. They're not fully pre-prepared. They're actually kind of adapted and adjusted to this very uniquely shaped, low resolution pixelation in a way, and they're emergent. And so you can't ever exactly tell what you will end up seeing on a particular night. And so I think it's a very different, for that reason, it's very different than, say, for example, a narrative way of thinking about this. Another example that is also one of these responsive systems, and maybe a more classic one, showing a weather, different kinds of weather data. And what Cindy Lamaro and Chris Popovich did here is really rethink how this ambient data presentation could take place. So unlike in the past where we might have had certain kind of resolution at our disposal, in this instance, they really went to an even more intricate system, and the paper in Pittsburgh did a nice summary of everything that it does. Of course, these things have to be learned over time by a community. They're not just something that people know by heart. But what's nice about it is that in this way, you can sort of become a local, right? So the more people start to explore what this infrastructure is trying to communicate to them, the more they start to feel like they know something potentially that makes them into one of the local community members, right? And so, here's their more intricate system. They actually replaced what had fallen into disrepair. This was a lighting installation that had been set up much earlier, I think in the 80s, and then had fallen into disrepair. And then the designers reinvented it as something that was much more digital, much more fine-grained in a way, and presenting a lot more data in real time than was possible in the past. And then just one last look back towards the London Eye and the online sentiment analysis that I'd mentioned before that Social Limited had done, really reflecting the processing that they've done on the various Twitter feeds, and how that then led to a rethinking of that infrastructure. And then the last category is really around interactive lighting systems. And here there's also different scales available and different types of things. And so I'll show two quite different examples. One is an example from an indoor-outdoor space in a way, because it's a cafe space in a new educational institution. And I think when you think of cities and urban communities, there's many transitional spaces that are starting to be claimed as public space in a way, whether you're thinking about shopping malls, whether you're thinking about transitions to parking areas, whether you're thinking about educational spaces that have a public mission, whether you're thinking about museums and theaters and the kinds of institutions that are really a key part of any city, you start to encounter these kinds of spaces that have a broader goal. And so here is this cafe, which was created for this engineering school. And I'm just going to flip through it, but what's quite interesting about this unique new caffeine and creativity, as they call it, which I think is a great title, is that this display actually is intended and is being programmed by the students of this program. And because they're computer science students, because they're engineering students, they are really interested in exploring the capabilities of these systems and creating unique algorithmic and other content in an interactive way that potentially pushes what they might otherwise be able to explore in just a classroom setting. Changing gears quite a bit, I wanted to show one last example of a project that was a short-term collaboration with a group here in Boston called Design Museum Boston, where we created QR code-enabled wayfinding beacons that you can see the web application here that allowed you to directly interact with these solar-powered temporary beacons that were wireless. So you can see a mapping system on the one side, and then you can see how this was integrated into an outdoor exhibition on urban furniture. So the goal was really to allow people to navigate this space and understand more about the exhibit pieces, and then at the same time have a playful interaction with these lighting beacons, which, as I said, were temporary, so that's why they're quite simple. They have a solar panel on top, and people can directly log into them without needing to identify themselves. And since it's only a single pixel, the interaction is basic and easy for people to understand. And you can also see from a distance across this whole almost 1 kilometer area in length of what's actually going on. Are there other people? Is there more activity? And this was key for the Design Museum to enable people to visit these exhibits in the evening hours when otherwise there may not have been many people around, and in fact, actually, people might not even have dared to venture into those areas. And so, you know, just sort of rounding out this thinking, it's really about these new infrastructures, and I quite like Malcolm McCullough from the University of Michigan's term about digital ground. And in a way, we're creating digital ground. We're creating an extension of public space through these digital technologies. And by doing that, we're giving people something that is much more than they might have experienced otherwise. And so it's thinking about all of these possibilities and exploring them that we're all engaged in. And that's, I think, our key goal today, to continue to push the boundaries of what's possible. And so, you know, I like to think of it as it's beyond the image in a way. And Kevin Lynch is a very well-known planner from the 70s and 80s who really thought a lot about the image of the city, as he called it. So how, when you think of your city, what is the image that pops into your mind? How easy and reliable is it for you to call up that image and, as a result, navigate through a different kinds of environments? This is quite a fun project from New York, where the street sign actually updates based on web feeds of activities and events and turns the sign around. So in a way, it's the perfect meeting of past and future, of digital and analog. And so for that, I think it's quite a nice thing to think about. And so I think all of us together, as we engage with different kinds of communities, are building bridges. We're creating different kinds of experiences. We're allowing people to reinvent and rethink systems and buildings that they maybe never really thought about. Here's an example of the gateway to Boston, the Zakim Bridge. And if it does work, I'm going to try and play a quick video of Joyce Zakim, the wife of the bridge's namesake, and where she really eloquently talks about what's possible when you do this kind of work. And so let's hope this works. I'm going to try to make the sound as loud as possible, and hopefully this will work. So just one moment here.
It's a tremendous honor to be standing here today. This magnificent bridge is a powerful symbol of Lenny's mission, and the spectacular relighting of the bridge reminds us how Lenny was a beacon to others, guiding people to believe that everybody matters and that while one individual can make a difference, it is the joining of untold numbers of individuals through the building of bridges that truly changes the world.
I'm gonna stop sharing. I hope you all heard Joyce Zakim's words there. She's a truly inspirational woman, but I think she hit the nail on the head when she said that all of this is about transformation, and I think you saw lots and lots of different examples of how transformation is possible. And you know, I hope you guys have some questions or thoughts or ideas on how some of these notions apply to your cities and your communities. Thanks very much for listening. So, any questions? I don't see any. Gareth, I'm not sure if you see any questions on your side. I'm trying to look in the Q&A.
I don't see anything. I do see some nice applause from Tony. Nice comment from Igor, so that was good.
Yeah, I saw some colleagues from all around the world. You know, it's always interesting to see what, how diverse, you know, these projects are globally. It's really not the same thing if you're talking about, you know, if you're talking about a city in China versus a city in Europe versus a city in North America. And what I find particularly interesting is just the different actors and stakeholders you encounter in those different places. You know, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, there's just a real diversity of actors and stakeholders.
Yeah, no, that was extremely interesting. I don't see any Q&A, but definitely on behalf of myself and the audience, I'd like to say thank you very much, Suzanne, for that.
It was really fun.
Really appreciate it.
It was really fun, yeah.
So I think there's a question asked from Tony. If you could just scroll down and check.
Okay, I will. Yep, I'm going, scrolling. What do you see this tech down the line in 5 years? I think one of the things I see is that we're going to figure out better ways to integrate these types of technologies into everyday life. So I think for now, you know, we've got these festivals, or we have moments when, you know, things are really sophisticated and over the top. But then we go back to kind of everyday life. And I think what we'll start to see is different ways that these things become integrated with everyday life in a more robust way, whether it has to do with kind of information display, with feedback loops, with more integration with end users. A lot of what's happening is that also cities are trying to figure out how to engage their citizens, how to keep them engaged, how to keep them interested. As they invest in those technologies, I think it will also start to have them integrate with public space and different kinds of things that we'll encounter in public space, different kinds of infrastructures, dynamic systems, even things that, you know, were not really something that was possible before, but simple things like now, you know, using sensors, for example, to adapt to available retail lighting in streetlights. So streetlights dimming as a result of retail lighting changing, or all these things that were, you know, are also very much tied to perception. So yeah, some thoughts there.
And the video, Suzanne, can that be, that's on YouTube, I believe?
Oh, so the video, yep, all the videos are on YouTube. You can find the Lenny Zakem, I can find that link for you guys. So that's all on YouTube, and also the what you'll also be able to find is the video about the Tour Montparnasse. That's on the Phillips case studies. It's a really great video that shows you kind of how the tower transitions from day to night, and a lot of all the ideas that that Aegis thought about to give the building a sense of movement in a way that really, I think, changed people's opinion about a building that was very much lodged in their mind in a particular way, and this reinvention pulled it out of that, or changed that idea.
Okay.
Yep. And yeah, and I'm also very curious, you know, to hear from folks about different kinds of projects that they're encountering. We're thinking about writing also an article around different kinds of underpass spaces. There seems to be a lot of interest from cities to rethink areas that otherwise would have been neglected. So whether it's underpasses or walkways that people avoid typically, and that you know the city wants to reinvent with both landscape and light interventions.
Okay.
So some thoughts there. Yeah, and it looks like we had a pretty broad group of people. Yeah, I mean, you know, UVA. I see some folks from UVA. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely folks here who are part of this revolution, you know, and I think that's what I find particularly interesting too, when you see folks from interaction design, from computer science, from a software background, from very different backgrounds starting to engage with lighting because it's now a digital medium, and then you start to invent things that weren't possible before. So many things will be enabled by that. Yeah. Many more things we can't even imagine yet.
Exciting times.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think if there isn't any more questions for Suzanne, I think we can close the session.
Yep, thanks very much, Gareth. Thanks, Shuma, for coordinating. Apologies for the sound at the beginning. And please do send along questions if you have them.
Yep, thank you.
Bye-bye.